So it's yet another episode of the Crypto Radar podcast with Edmonton Darren and Soul Paul. That's me. I'm Soul Paul and he's Edmonton Darren. How you doing today,
Soul
Mr.
Paul
Darren?
has better ring to it.
It does a little bit, yeah.
Edmonton Darren doesn't really, I don't know.
Yeah, well,
There's no,
I mean, what do you want to be, Vegas, Darren? You're not that far.
I don't live there, so yeah. I actually love Las Vegas. It's beautiful. But have you ever been there?
Oh, yeah. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, no, I haven't. Never been there.
Right,
Nothing ever happened while I was there. Yeah, no
heard
idea. Where is this again? Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear it's cool.
I only go there for shopping.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard other stories.
Good deal on
other
the outlet mall.
That's why everyone goes.
I've always found the outlet malls there kind of disappointing. Maybe it's because I live next to the Great White Mall, but I just find it's not that compelling. I go there and it's like, oh, okay, it's a bit cheaper than it would be back in Canada because of the fact that this stuff is fabricated or produced in the States, and then so maybe they pass that savings on to you. But I've always found it's not really much of a better deal, honestly. Maybe it's because the Canadian dollar is total trash.
Yeah, that's not going to help. And if you are, I mean, you are unfairly positioned in terms of your proximity to the Northern White Great Mall of America, whatever that monstrosity is called. I'm sure for a lot of Canadians, the situation might be different. But yeah, no, if I was ever to go to Vegas, which I've not, never been, barely even heard of it, to be honest with you. But if I was ever to go, I'd be going to outlet malls and nothing else, absolutely nothing else. I wouldn't, I don't know what there else is.
A magic show or get hypnotized or something, or.
Oh yeah, I'm down with that. Do they do that there? See, I don't know anything about it.
Okay, it's fun. It's a nice place. You should try it sometime. There's nice hotels. I don't think they're doing too well right now, probably, I'd guess. But yeah,
that'd be a ripper time to go. I wonder when they're going to start gouging us, though, the airlines and hotels, right? You know.
So, hey, let's get on to the Crypto Radar podcast here. What's on your radar, Paul?
On my radar, Mr. Darren, is what I found quite interesting, and there is yet to be an answer to this riddle. You may remember the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act bill that became law on the 27th of March. And an earlier version of that bill made reference to a digital dollar, which would be the way that the American government would get money into people's pockets. The reference to the digital dollar was in the final bill not there at all. And so there was a bunch of coverage on look at this, the United States found a use case for a digital version of its dollar, and that's the fastest way and easiest way to get money into people's pockets. And suddenly it disappeared. And there's been no real explanation as to what on earth happened, who put it in there, first of all, and who took it out, and why. Yeah,
I find it interesting how you get some crypto folks that see that as bullish for Bitcoin, and it's like you realize this has nothing to do with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, I know. Are you of the belief that stablecoins, in fact, are kind of a threat to cryptocurrencies and the idea of them?
Not at all. I mean, I think they're entirely separate entities. They don't run on a basis of scarcity at all. I mean, they're just pegged to an existing infinitely printed currency. So,
yeah, right. Okay, so they're in infinite supply.
Well, they're in whatever supply the fiat currency is that they're pegged to, which at the moment is infinite. So therefore, they don't have the distinctive quality that makes a scarce asset, say like Bitcoin, have the longer term value and utility that it has. I mean,
yeah, true.
It's less volatile, so it has a use case. I'm not saying they don't have a use case.
Some cryptos do have inflation built in, and that's
right.
Annual. And Bitcoin is one of the ones that has a finite number of ever to be created coins, right? Not all do.
Right. And Ethereum doesn't, for example.
Right. For example, yeah. I've always been concerned that stable coins are kind of going to ruin the party, because I think actually. Yeah, well, one of the things that I enjoy about cryptocurrency is their volatility, because
that's not going away because of stablecoins, though.
Unless cryptocurrencies go away because of stablecoins.
You really think so?
non-stable cryptocurrencies go away because I don't know if that's going to happen, but if it does, the volatility is out the window, right?
But I mean, if you look at fiat currency now, I mean, it's right. But I mean, a U.S. digital currency is going to be an unfixed supply, and it's going to be centralized. So what's the point of making it blockchain? Like those are the very things that make blockchain have its unique value, is that it can be used to make something that isn't centrally controlled, right? Again, I think they have their use case, but I do not see it as a threat to Bitcoin. It's as much a threat to Bitcoin as peanut butter is a threat to jelly. I mean,
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, you can put them together if you like, or if you don't like it, you stick with one or stick with the other, and I don't know.
So I remember George W. Bush talked about human beings and fish coexisting peacefully. So human beings and fish to George Bush is to you a Bitcoin and a fiat-backed stable coin.
I think a digital currency has as much to do with Bitcoin as it does to do with gold. They're separate things entirely, right? I mean, the whole advantage of Bitcoin is that it's a separate, non-correlated hard asset. So, and you can look at what's happening and go, oh, but it was correlated when things crashed. Yes, okay, there is some correlation there because everybody wanted cash. But if you look over the longer term, there's always going to be some correlation. It's like the old saying, a broken clock is right twice a day, right? But over the long term, I think you can see there isn't always a consistent level of correlation, which means it doesn't correlate.
Yes.
And that's its advantage, right? It's like you talked about the volatility. That's what makes it interesting. I was talking to a friend the other day who's into stocks, and he's like, now's the time. I've got to buy oil stocks. I've got to buy these stocks, and he could be right. It could be the time to do that, right? I mean, I think oil here in Alberta is Western crude. It's called, is selling for something like $5 US a barrel. Like,
my God, wow,
it's bad. Okay. When they did the provincial budget a couple of months ago, they based it on $58 a barrel. Now it's $5 a barrel.
And Alberta's going to be, do I really want to go back in summer? There's Calgarians especially, right?
You're not going to want to hang out. But
it's Armageddon to them. Wow, that's crazy.
It's pretty bad. But anyway, he's saying, oh, now's a good time to buy stocks, and it's probably true. People are fearful. People are running away from it. So that may have some truth to it.
By that, right? Darren means it's possibly true, and none of this is any financial advice whatsoever.
Precisely. Yeah. But then he was saying, Bitcoin's kind of the same thing. When people get fearful, then it's probably the right time to buy. And I mean, that can be true. But again, he comes from the world of buying in the stock market, and he kind of compares that to Bitcoin. But in reality, they don't operate the same way at all. For example, I talked to you, what was this now, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the hash rate. Remember that?
Yes.
Talked about the Bitcoin hash rate. And I was like, I cannot believe it hasn't dropped. And then literally it dropped the most it's ever dropped, like within the day after we recorded that. And so what happened then?
Prophetically.
What happened then was that, of course, the difficulty adjustment came because the hash rate fell. And the difficulty adjustment made it so that it would be easier to make a profit at a lower hash rate. And therefore, one could make a profit on Bitcoin at a lower price because the amount of cost to produce it was lowered. Therefore, there's a downward selling pressure on the price of Bitcoin because you were able to sell it at a lower price and still break even, so to speak, right? And so now, of course, what's going to happen is because it is profitable at a lower level, people will turn their machines back on, and you're going to see possibly it'll fluctuate for a week or two before it goes back up, but then it'll start climbing again. And at some point, it will balance itself. Now, maybe it takes another hash rate drop. Another difficulty drop, right? I don't know. But the point being, it does not work like stocks. Stocks do not have a hash rate. They don't have a difficulty adjustment. They don't have a decentralized, well, I guess you could argue there's a decentralization element to stocks because of the fact that participants can be buying and selling from anywhere. In a lot of ways, it just does not work like Bitcoin. So
This podcast has been interrupted by an important community announcement. We are moving on to a different topic.
What's one of the things on your radar this week, this crazy week of ours?
Well, we had this crypto art week, which I think went really well.
Yeah.
I was walking around in that Crypto Voxels art world created by, I think the artist was Coldy. And there was a whole bunch of blockchain art in there. And that was pretty wild walking around in there. Yeah, I mean, you walk around in it and you could see the artwork from the different artists, and you could see it has kind of a retro feel to it in terms of the interface and the graphics walking around. But you're looking at art that has a certain degree of permanence to it because of the fact that it's tokenized. It uses the NFT tokens, and so that gives it a certain wow factor, I guess, that otherwise it would be lacking because it would just be another, I don't know, simplistic Minecraft environment. But because of the tokenization of the artwork, as you walk around, there's something more, I'd almost say, physical about it. Do you know what I mean? It has a certain permanence to it that otherwise would be lacking. So that's kind of cool. Yeah.
And what were the art? Can you describe a few of the pieces? They're obviously digital art.
There was a variety there. There was a few works. Josie Bellini had one on display there. She was someone that I talked to this past week. She had a work of art there. That's the what's it called? The unlisted Fed monkey artwork, where she has the picture of a monkey that's kind of meant to be like the Federal Reserve, and I think it's pretty clear what she thinks of the Fed. And it has on the one side like a million, and then a billion, and then a trillion, and the Fed monkey is sprayed over the million and the billion, and just keeps making up numbers basically, right?
Right. Okay.
And then standing in contrast to that is an image of the girl with the gas mask, the Bitcoin filter gas mask.
Yeah.
It's kind of her trademark, and she's standing in front of a plexiglass shielded 21 million that says Bitcoin in the background, and kind of just showing the difference between the two. And the Fed monkey has a spray can that says, I think it says bailouts on it. Another one says quantitative easing. And so obviously it's taking a stab at, the whole fiat monetary scenario that we're facing now. And so cool artwork. There were also artworks there that are quite a lot more on the abstract side of things. You have some stuff there from a number of artists. The one that I spoke with this past week was Robness. And so I spoke with him about the kind of interesting issue that is going on in the crypto art world right now that took place in the physical art world already probably about a century ago. And the artist that kind of comes up time after time within those circles is Marcel Duchamp, who at one point in time when he was exploring this world of pop art, I think it was 1917, presented a urinal, however, turned it on its side and signed it and called it Fountain. And people kind of reacted with disgust and rejection and that kind of thing, and ended up kind of being tucked away in a corner in this gallery. And but it was a kind of a momentous occasion because it was taking something that was an already existing object and changing it into art simply by changing its functionality, right? So the artist was the one in control of whether or not it was art. And so anyway, this Robness artist, he's been on this platform, Super Rare. I talked with the CEO from Super Rare as well. And Robness had been successful on that platform for some time. But then more recently, there was some flack between one artist, I think it was Max Osiris is his name, who was producing some art, and then Robness was producing some art. And there was, I forget what triggered it, but essentially there was an act of protest where Max Osiris basically got removed from the platform, and there was a feeling of they were being censored or their art was being controlled in one way or another. I don't know all the details right now off the top of my head. I wrote about it this past week in an article called Immutable Trash. And anyway, he starts making GIFs that are basically just direct lifts of pre-existing images. Okay, so there's like a Bitcoin logo, and then he tokenized it, right? And Ethereum logo, and clearly they were not his work. And that it wasn't the point to say these are my artworks. It was kind of more of a almost like a Marcel Duchamp thing, like taking something that already existed and doing your own spin on it, right? And so he took like I think it was a Home Depot image of a garbage can, and he added a effect to it from this one app called Photomosh, so that it makes it have kind of a colorful effect. And anyway, the Super Rare platform removed all of these because they had been tokenized and weren't actually his creations. And so since then, Robness is no longer on the platform.
So what came out in the wash? He remains banned from the...
Right. Well, yes, Robness is no longer on the platform. They use other platforms. A lot of their work is on one called OpenSea, OpenSea, OpenSea. And you can see a lot of the tokenized artworks there. They also use other platforms. One's called Rareable, although the thing being Super Rare is the biggest one. Super Rare is the largest volume. It's kind of the most respected, right? So there's a bit of a loss there if you're no longer on that platform. In terms of coming to a conclusion, I don't know. It's more about the question, right? Like if you take something that already exists and you put a twist on it of some sort, is it something that you're entitled to then take credit for in a sense and say that it's your art, right? You know? So
I knew a sculpturist in Australia back in the day who had this argument that doing that, taking an existing object and just doing it, basically nothing with it other than flipping it around and writing some, this would fall into what his category of what he describes as not art at all.
Okay.
So, yeah. So his argument was that our art is the creation of something new, and if you've essentially taken what's already there and done very, very little with it, it's not art. It doesn't count. Yeah, I mean, and others disagreed with him. So,
but if you look at the entire pop art genre of the 20th century, I mean, Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque, like you're talking big, huge, Andy Warhol. Okay.
Yeah.
These are people who, like, you know, they created collage. They took images. They maybe cut them up or altered them, or, you know, and came up with a new work.
Sure.
Right?
But it was the presentation. I think in Warhol's case, especially, he was presenting it in a certain way, and it was radically different to the way it was the intention of its presentation originally, right?
Sure. Wouldn't that be true of the garbage can?
The urinal that's turned upside down. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know where my mate would sit on this whole thing. I don't actually know where he sits on Andy Warhol. It'd be interesting to find out. But to me, Andy Warhol absolutely made interpretations and represented things that were existing in an entirely different way, an entirely different context. So I don't know.
And in the case of Robness, keep in mind with like this garbage can GIF, for example, these are like purposefully done with very little effort. It's purposely done with kind of a shoddy kind of effort to make the point. Okay, like these are things that literally you would take this image, you throw it into an app, you change a couple settings, parameters on the app, and you save it, and there's your artwork. Like they literally take less than 5 minutes, 2-3 minutes to make, right? And so he's kind of taking it to that extreme of, okay, I'm going to kind of see where this goes, right? And he kind of compared it to, say, like punk rock music, where you can make a song in 5 minutes, right? Kind of that element of protest to it, that anti-establishment concept, right? So it's an interesting topic. Yeah. Tell me about something else going on with you.
This is an interesting tidbit on my radar, and it's only been on my radar for about an hour. I stumbled across the first couple of minutes of Ivan on Tech. Is that how you?
Ivan on Tech or Ivan on Tech? I don't know.
Yeah, that guy. I think he works at. I think he's from. He's a finance minister of Sweden or something.
Wow, really?
Anyway, he talks at speeds yeah. He speaks at the speed of lightning, and it's it goes for about an hour. But if I just what something popped out of me, I was 5 minutes into it, and he talked about the idea that Bitcoin to the state and the way and our kind of fiat and central banking system today, he likened that to mathematics and the church back in medieval times, whereupon suddenly people were exposed to math and understood some of the ridiculousnesses that are being promoted by the church. People were being told what to believe by the church. Math proved it all wrong. And his argument is, that what Bitcoin is doing is teaching people that our central banking systems at the moment, the way we run our economies, is laughably incorrect, and there's going to be a revolution. I think that's how he's. Yeah.
I wrote about it probably, but I wrote a whole series about why Bitcoin is worth looking into. And one of the sections of it was about the separation of money and state. And it kind of harkened back to the separation of church and state. And
I reckon he got that from you then, because that's exactly where he was going.
Is that right?
Yeah. I didn't stick around to see where it went. So what the idea is that we will separate money from state.
I think it could happen over the course of time, because as of now, you do have, if you look at the separation of church and state, by and large, no matter what your religious background is, that's been beneficial to society as a whole. And, you have the same thing with money, where it's kind of under the control of the state. And if you could get to a point with math where you can objectively see the money as a separate entity from the state, I think it opens up other liberties that are not currently available to us. So I haven't seen what he said, but I can see it being an interesting thought. I mean, if you look at gold has an objective value. No government can say it's worth this much. So no, I can see it being an interesting point in terms of separating the value of what you're trading as opposed to having the value imposed upon you, right? Because you and I can agree, if I say to you, hey, I want you to do this and this work for me, I'll pay you 1 Bitcoin for it. And you go, okay, sounds good. And you accept it. Well, right there, that's a free exchange of value without anyone telling us what it should be worth.
I do wonder, though, where by extension, where does this leave the state in our lives, right? Because I think this week has shown that we actually need our governments. We need them to be effective. We need them to do stuff for us that we can't do individually. We need collective action against, certain events. And so I wonder if this extends to, money is probably the most powerful tool that the state has. Take that from them, then what? Then what have we got? Where are we at? And I'm not sure that I like the answer to that question.
I don't think they have to be one or the other, though. I think they can both exist, just like gold has existed for millennia, just like silver and other hard assets have existed. I don't think it negates the other necessarily, but it is a form of value that is not dictated by the state. Yeah. In that sense, I think it has its utility. And that kind of goes back to earlier when we talked about digital currencies. That, again, is a state-controlled money that basically is, we don't decide what that's worth, right? Like, we could take rocks if we wanted to. I could go out to my yard and grab a few rocks and go, hey, I'll give you these 5 rocks for that. And if you wanted that, if you liked the rocks, we could say, okay, well, there we go. That's our exchange of value. Obviously, they're too plentiful.
What have I done, Matt? What for those rocks?
I don't know, mowed my lawn. I don't know.
I mowed your lawn? Okay. They want to be some pretty cool rocks there you got.
Rocks are surprisingly expensive. When we put in rocks inside of our yard, I couldn't believe how expensive it was to go to the rock place.
There's
and load up a truck full of rocks. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, the Rockatorium. That's it. Rocks and more.
Rock on, man. Rock on. Do you have what else is on your radar, Darren? I think you must have had something else up your sleeve.
Well, I did also talk with Yoni Asiya. I hope that's the correct pronunciation of his name. He's the CEO of eToro.
Oh, right. Okay.
So we spoke. He had kind of an interesting story. He talks about being a difficult child. He was very hyperactive, didn't pay a whole lot of attention in class. And so he shared about his young life and how that's kind of the teachers and the influence they had on him. He was actually spoke very positively about his teachers. He said he would not have been an easy kid to manage. But he talks about his life going into being CEO of eToro, and he had a few paths that he went down before going into that. One of them was working in the roller coaster industry. He worked in roller coasters, and he was one of these companies that, if you ever go on a roller coaster and there's cameras everywhere and they film you while you're on the ride, and then when you'd be finished with the ride, I don't know if you remember doing this, you'd see like all screen captures of you, from the ride, and you'd be like, oh, look at that, I look hilarious there, and I'm like, right. And apparently he ran a company that set those all up all over the world. And basically, they would sell the DVDs to the clients after their ride. He was into the software side of it and the programming part of it and transmitting all the data and all that stuff. And then from there, I guess he ventured into the whole eToro concept, being taking something that had previously been pretty inaccessible to the average person and making it something that incorporated socializing, the social aspect, right, of things like Facebook and Twitter, but bringing that into trading, right? And you could comment on other people's trades, and you could follow other people's trades. You could even copy other people's trades, which was a totally new idea, right? Like to say, oh, this person's a really good trader, so instead of me having to figure out how to trade, I'm just going to copy them, right? Yeah. And you could literally just click a button and you would make the same trades. Right. And so for people who had never been exposed to trading, it was a huge step forward in accessibility. Right.
It's crazy how much the trading landscape has changed in the past decade.
Absolutely.
It hasn't taken long. Yeah.
It hasn't. And I think they started in 2008 or 2007.
Right.
So they were there during a pretty crazy time economically, similar to now.
Did you know, speaking of crazy times, I know that there's a lot of COVID news. I mean, everyone is covering it, and we wanted to leave it to the end. Mm-hmm. I'm aware of you were somewhat disappointed in some well-known and well-liked identities on the old crypto Twitter,
right,
mouthing off about how not such a big deal COVID-19 is.
Right. Well, I mean, probably the most two prominent ones I've seen are John McAfee and Roger Ver, and they've both been kind of saying, oh, this is ridiculous. Just today, even Roger put up a thing that said, if you, in all caps, are worried about the coronavirus, you, in all caps, should self-isolate. Leave the rest of us alone, is what he says.
I love it when people talk to me like that.
Right. It's very, I don't know what it is about libertarian that always evokes some kind of angry response. To me, it should be the opposite. If you're a libertarian, why are you getting angry at anybody? It's he has a list of statistics, and he says from January 1st to March 25th, the deaths by coronavirus have been just over 21,000. And then he compares it to other deaths. So, for example, deaths by malaria are far more, 10 times higher, 228,000. Deaths by HIV and AIDS, 390,000, which is true. Those are huge numbers comparatively, right? But are they on an exponential curve is the question. Okay, so if you look at something like death by malaria, I would guess.
Yeah, that's a year-round.
That's kind of a steady, flat rate.
Yes, it's going to be. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas the coronavirus is an exponential curve. And you would think people who are into crypto would recognize parabolic patterns.
You would think so.
Right?
Yeah.
And we talked earlier about the illustration where you say to someone, tell you what, I'll give you a penny today, and then a penny, double that the next day, and then double that the next day. How long will it take you to make $1 million? And I looked it up. It's 28 days.
28 days.
28 days of just starting with a penny and doubling it, right? You get to $1 million.
See, one penny, 2 pennies, 4 pennies, 8 pennies, like that, and you get to $1 million in 28 days.
Right. So then
It's
if you
under a
look
month.
at COVID, right?
Uh-huh.
And you go, okay, some places around the world where they've been slowing things down, it's doubling every, say, week or so, right? Some places doubling every 3-4 days. Some places doubling every 2 or 3 days. Okay. So by that same illustration, you're talking an enormous increase in people with cases and if it's every 2 days, in a couple of months.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't do anything to prevent the spread. Because here's the problem with his argument is we don't know who is sick. His attitude to me seems a little bit unaware of the reality of the mathematics, which is stunning to me that someone of that background wouldn't see that. Same with John McAfee. You're talking a brilliant guy.
Yeah. What has he said, though? I didn't catch what he...
He basically has said the whole thing's a hoax.
But okay. Give me publicity, please. How outrageous can I be today? These are kind of a little insensitive, and it's not only that people are dying and people are getting sick, it's the displacement, the economic impact on families and stuff is
well, and
is
he would
horrendous.
say that's worse than what's actually caused by the disease, though, right? Like if you look at the economic fallout, it's actually worse in many ways for a lot of people than the disease itself. Of course, that's not true. If you have it and you die, then it's worse.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's that kind of, I don't know. You got to think of people besides yourself here. Right.
Yeah. Sometimes doing things collectively is the best way to do it.
Right. I mean, as much as we'd like to all kind of be our own little islands, that's just not the way the world works. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's certain things about the libertarian argument I totally am in line with and I agree with to a large extent, in fact. But when it comes to things like this, it's like you said, we do need those kind of collective efforts to make things work. Right?
Yeah.
It can't just be black and white,
Yeah. No, I'm agreeing with you, man. I think that and it's incredibly insensitive of them anyway, but it also entirely lacking in logic. And none of us know where this goes. So to pretend that it is going to end up being less a severe a disease as all those other ones mentioned is, I think, fanciful at best.
Well, and it's not like people who are, getting COVID, we're going to get malaria, or we're going to get the flu, or we're going to get HIV. This is in addition to those people dying from those other things. So it's not like they're going, oh, okay, I'll just get COVID instead of malaria. Like, right? So these other people still are dying from these other things, right? So even if it is 22,000 people, is that okay? Right? Like, shouldn't you try to minimize that anyway? Like, I don't understand. Like, you're saying it's perfectly okay for these thousands of people to die from this because it's not that many people, right? Well, if it was your father or mother or your brother, it doesn't matter that there's only 22,000 people. It's still a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And it also ignores that there are going to be billions of dollars spent every year on treating and dealing with, especially malaria and HIV.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not ignoring, nobody's counted the numbers and said it's not really worth spending this kind of money on. I mean, there's billions and billions of dollars being spent on those things for decades. And so now we're going to spend a bit of money on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are, to me, equivalents. There's no.
Well, it's like people who criticize the government because, they should spend more of their money and time on this issue, not on this issue. It's like, actually, they do spend money on both issues.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The government doesn't just go, oh, I'm going to do this one thing now.
Yeah.
Take care of this one issue.
Things are kind of
leave
complex.
Everything else aside, right?
Yeah. Stuff's complex. There's a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't buy the argument. I think it's a silly argument.
Well, man, knocking them down with a hatchet today. It was good talking to you again, Darren, on the Crypto Radar podcast, the weekly Crypto Radar podcast.
Yeah, it's
which
good.
Everyone should subscribe to down there. great catching you again, Darren, and I'll have a nice day. I'll see you again next week. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
You too, man.